For my presentation, I chose to talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 5 stages of grief. Our book, it teaches us that grief is the powerful sorrow that an individual feels at a profound loss, especially when a loved one dies. It's deep and personal, and that anguish can overtake daily life. And I think the important thing to remember too about grief is that it's normal, especially in this class, the lifespan development, that grief comes a lot often at tragedy. It comes when people die, which is a normal part of life. Sometimes there are complications to grief, and this may include disenfranchised grief, where people are prevented from publicly mourning due to cultural customs or social restrictions. There's also incomplete grief, where investigations or autopsy may interfere with the grieving process. And as I was researching the 5 stages of grief, I found a website called The 5 Stages of Grief at grief.com, and they had really good insight. And so the next 4 minutes of me talking is going to be what I found on that website that I feel like is important to talk about in the 5 stages of grief. So the first stage of grief is denial. And in this stage, the world becomes meaningless and overwhelming, and life makes no sense. We are in a state of shock and denial, and sometimes we go numb. We wonder how we can go on, and if we can go on, why we should go on. We try to find a way to simply get through each day, and denial and shock help us to cope and make survival possible. Denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief, and denial is natural. It's the natural phase of grief. And the second stage is anger. And whether or not you agree or disagree, anger is a necessary stage of the healing process. So if you do feel anger with loss, then allow yourself to feel it, even if it seems like it's never going to end. And the more you truly feel it, the more it will begin to dissipate and the more you will heal. There are many other emotions under the anger, and you will get to them in time. But anger is the emotion we are most used to managing. The truth is that anger has no limit. It can extend not only to your friends, the doctors, your family, yourself and your loved ones who died, but also to God or your higher power. You can just be angry, and it's unpredictable sometimes. And I think, kind of a side note, that's important to remember is that the stages of grief, they don't always happen for certain amounts of time. Denial may last for months and anger may last for a minute. They might overlap. They might go back and forth. They're not linear. They might just be a circle and spiral of grief. But it's important to go through the process and let yourself feel what you feel and work through that. And so the third stage of grief that Miss Ross talks about is bargaining. So after a loss, bargaining may take the form of a temporary truce. You may say, what if I devote the rest of my life to helping others? Then can I wake up and realize that this has all been a bad dream? We become lost in a maze. We live from if only to if only or what if statements. We want life to return to what it was before, and we want our loved ones to be restored. We want to go back in time and to fix the problem before it became a problem. We want to try to somehow fight the tumor before we knew there was a tumor. And the thing here with bargaining is that if we remain in the past, if we try to negotiate our way out of the hurt, then we'll be stuck. And this could last for weeks or months. The next stage of grief is depression, and depression is hard. These empty feelings present themselves, and grief enters our lives on a deeper level, deeper than we ever imagined. This depressive stage feels as though it will last forever, but it's important to understand that it won't last forever, that this is an appropriate response to grief and to great loss. We might feel a fog, but that's normal. It's normal with grief and with loss. And the last stage of grief is acceptance. So this stage is about accepting the reality that our loved one is physically gone and recognizing that this new reality is permanent. We will never really like this reality or make it okay, but eventually we accept it. We learn to live with it. It's the new norm with which we must learn to live. We must try to live now in a world where our loved one is missing. And finding that acceptance may be just having more good days than bad days. As we begin to live again and enjoy our life, we may often feel that in doing so we are betraying our loved one. We can never replace what has been lost, but we can make new connections, new meaningful relationships. And instead of denying our feelings, we need to listen to our needs. We move, we change, we grow, we evolve. We may start to reach out to others and become involved in their lives. We invest in our friendships and in our relationship with others. We begin to live again, but we cannot do so until we have given grief its time. And like I said before, grief, the 5 stages are not linear. Sometimes you might find acceptance and you might still feel anger sometimes. But you just have to become rooted in yourself and come back to that acceptance.